When we talk about the largest creatures to ever roam this planet, we're not talking about some minor size advantage here. We're talking about absolute jaw-dropping dominance. The undisputed champions. Without a doubt, the sauropods. These long-necked titans didn't just walk the earth. They ruled it, and not by a small margin either. But hey, let's get even more specific here. Among these long-necked marvels, the titanosaurs stood out as true global juggernauts. They weren't just massive, they were everywhere. From South America to Antarctica, you could spot them on all 7 continents during the mighty Cretaceous period. That's right, all of them. Their size, practically unthinkable. Calling them giants feels like calling the sun kinda warm. Some of these monsters tipped the scale at over 80 tons. That's heavier than a military tank. And when it comes to length, think more than 30 meters or over 100 feet from snout to tail. Imagine stacking 7 full-grown African bush elephants back to back. That is what we're dealing with. And honestly, these animals were so incomprehensibly huge and widespread that we often forget to ask a pretty cool question. What was the largest dinosaur? That wasn't a sauropod. Thinking face. And yeah, your mind might instantly picture some colossal carnivore. Maybe a monstrous theropod like the Tyrannosaurus rex, right? I mean, to take down something that big, you'd have to be pretty big yourself, yeah? And sure enough, T-Rex was no joke. It could push past 10 tons. But here's the plot twist. It still wasn't the biggest non-sauropod out there. No, there was another. And this one's gonna surprise you. Because the real answer. It wasn't a ferocious predator. It wasn't even from North America. Nope, it came from late Cretaceous China. And it wasn't a household name. Say hello to the Shantungosaurus. Yeah, that's a mouthful, but remember the name. Because this thing was an absolute unit. Originally discovered back in 1973, when paleontologists stumbled across not 1, but 5 scattered skeletons in the Wangshi Group of the Shandong Peninsula. While the fossils were incomplete and strewn about, it was immediately obvious. This was no ordinary dinosaur. Based on the massive bones, researchers initially thought they'd found a sauropod. I mean, what else could be that big, right? But nope. The skeletal design told a different story. It turned out to be a hadrosaur, a duck-billed herbivore, and one that resembled the well-known Edmontosaurus, which lived later in North America. What's wild is that the Shantungosaurus and Edmontosaurus were part of the same tribe, Saurolophony, and shared some features rarely seen in other hadrosaurs. Think, a unique skeletal structure, those signature dental batteries, and a surprisingly similar design despite being separated by continents. But here's the kicker, Edmontosaurus. The smaller cousin. Because Shantungosaurus wasn't just big. It was titanic. Like really titanic. Even the smallest specimen we've found, likely a juvenile, had a femur the size of a full-grown elephant's. Yeah, let that sink in. And the holotype, the original skeleton we base it on, was measured at about 14.7 meters or 48 feet long, weighing in at a conservative 13 tons. That's the same as stacking 7 average cars on top of each other. But that wasn't even the upper limit. No. The biggest individuals possibly hit 16 to 18 tons and stretched up to 17 meters, 56 feet, in length. Face screaming in fear, and some paleontologists argue it might have even been heavier, throwing around estimates like 19 to 22 tons. These are still debated, but even the lower numbers are record-breaking for non-sauropods. This made it heavier and longer than any theropod we've ever dug up, including Spinosaurus and T-Rex. Yeah. Read that again. And it wasn't just big among hadrosaurs or plant-eaters. It was the largest ornithischian ever discovered. That's the group that includes Triceratops, Stegosaurus, and a bunch of other fan-favorite herbivores. In fact, some of its femurs are so massive that they even rival the size of those found in some actual sauropods. And we haven't even fully reconstructed the largest individual yet. Flush face. Now, before you start imagining a 100-ton Shantungosaurus, let's pump the brakes. Hadrosaurs had different body proportions than sauropods, so don't expect that kind of weight. But still, this thing was absolutely enormous. To put it in perspective, it was 3x larger than a Stegosaurus, twice the size of an Ankylosaurus, 40% bulkier than even a maxed-out Triceratops. And just to have some fun with numbers, it would take about 260 average-sized humans just to match one Shantungosaurus in weight. That's one heck of a family photo, right? And get this, it likely walked at least part of the time on 2 legs, making it, officially, the largest bipedal animal to have ever walked this earth. Yep, even among dinosaurs this thing was in a league of its own. So, how does this prehistoric plant muncher stack up against the largest mammals to ever live? Pretty dang well. Only 2 land mammals even come close: the Paleoloxodon pneumaticus, a colossal ancient elephant, and the Paraceratherium, a gigantic rhino-like beast. But even compared to them, the Shantungosaurus is thought to have been longer and likely heavier on average. And what's really crazy? The huge ones weren't just rare freaks of nature. Nope. Out of the 50-plus specimens discovered so far, maybe even as many as 100, pretty much all of them were over 10 tons. This wasn't a one-off. This was the standard size. Flushface. Which begs the question: why the heck was it so gigantic compared to other hadrosaurs? We don't really know. The honest truth. It's still a mystery. But the leading theories suggest its massive size helped keep predators at bay, and allowed it to reach vegetation that smaller dinos simply couldn't. And while it did share its ecosystem with some giant neighbors like the Titanosaur zooxanthetan, Shantungosaurus might have actually been bigger than that too. Yeah, this herbivore wasn't just big. It was the boss of its environment. Predators. What predators? Even the region's apex hunter, the Zooxanthetanus, a tyrannosaur mind you, was only about 5 tons. That's a third the size of a full-grown Shantungosaurus. So, while juveniles may have been vulnerable, the adults, basically untouchable. And they weren't defenseless either. Not by a long shot. These guys had a lot going for them. Size. Speed. Potentially devastating. If one of these things charged into you at full speed, the impact would have packed the force of over 1,000 professional boxers landing punches at once. Kicking power. Yeah. Some paleontologists now believe hadrosaurs could deliver brutal kicks with those massive hind legs. Bad news for any hungry predator. Tail defense. You bet. The tail was longer than 2 cars, reinforced with ossified tendons, making it stiff and club-like, perfect for swinging with deadly force. Social strength. Absolutely. They moved in herds, making it even harder for predators to isolate a target. Communication. Their skulls had large nasal openings, suggesting they used inflatable skin flaps to make loud warning calls when danger lurked nearby. Basically, the Shantungosaurus wasn't just big. It was smart, social, defensive, and unbelievably tough. It was, in every sense of the word,